been purchased by this president of yours, Jefferson, oui? And now the town is full of Americans, huh? Well, I hope you have not come to take part in the fur trade. Huh? You can trust me. My whole family is in the fur trade, and you wouldn't like it. For in order to make any profit in the fur trade, you must be willing to trade with England. And we all know how you Americans who feel about the English, huh? Although I suppose, if you wish, you might go to work for one of the houses of trade already established. You should like this, to go to work as a voyageur, getting the goods in and the fur out. But tell me, this États-Unis of yours, when you do a job of work, what do you receive in return? And what are you paid in the United States? Money? Not here in San Luis, and there is precious little gold and silver in San Luis, and so I know one bateau man who works quite regularly for the trousers. And makes a very good profit in them too, also I understand. But I forget myself. You're Americans, and everyone knows that all Americans are farmers. You wouldn't like that either. You can trust me. I got just improved 10,000 pounds or so of wheat to keep my family in good French bread. For do you know what the Indians hereabouts were made that bread from? Huh? Maize, corn. No Frenchman worth his salt would touch the stuff, huh? And so I grow wheat to make proper French bread from. What's to look at you, huh? Some of you at least look a little soft to be farmers or voyageurs, huh? Perhaps you are merchants, come to see what riches we have here in Louisiana. I should tell my sons, Auguste and Pierre, to lock up the storehouse, boys. Huh? Oh no, par le bon Dieu, I have it. You have come to frighten all the Catholics, oui? I jest, huh? I jest. Me, I know better. But if it were not that some of the Creole hereabouts believed such a thing, did you know there might be no one at all in the village of Saint Louis? It is true. You see, there was some years ago now a war between we French and the Indians and you English. I cannot tell a lie, we lost. Huh? And when we lost all of the French territory on the east side of the river, the Illinois, as it is called. Cahokia, Kaskaskia, Fort de Chat. And when this was heard of in New Orleans, a handsome and very smart fur trader by the name of Pierre de Guest. Do you know this name of Monsieur Pierre? Do you know him? He came up the river to found a city on the west side, the French side of the river. And when he did so, all the Creole on the other side packed up their windows, their doors, their vaches, their cows, put them on boats, floated them across the river, and put them up here just to avoid the English Protestants. Huh? And so it is even now that we have even a city here in Saint Louis. But then, quelle surprise. Some time after the city had been founded, came into town some Spanish. And they said, you belong to us now. Now, I know it does not sound good, or the patois you hear around the city, but even now, officially you are in La Tierra de España, the land of Spain. Huh? And although I am a good French woman, to tell you the truth, these last few years to be Spanish has not been such a bad thing. Huh? Well, do you know what happened in 1789 in France? Huh? There was that year a revolution. The man Robespierre was about cutting off the heads of everyone. At this time, I was content to be Spanish. But then just this last Christmas, 1802, my son Pierre went to the city in New Orleans, you he met a Frenchman who said that this petit Corsican, the bit of Napoleon, had decided to take us back. Now, I did not know what to make of this news. But the Frenchman assured us all would be well with us, and I thought to myself, bon, if Napoleon wants to conquer Europe and leave us in peace to trade our fur, more power to him. But it has now been 8 months. It is August, and still we are waiting for a French governor of Saint Louis. Still, De La Souce is in place for the Spanish. Huh? And now this day in the house of my son Auguste, I hear that this man of yours, William Henry Harrison, does this seem familiar? William Henry Harrison? I thought so. I know all Americans who know each other. This man from Indiana has written about this purchase. Now tell me, this Jefferson was one of your American revolutionaries, was he not? Writing the Declaration of your Independence? Well, tell me, did he go about cutting off the heads of anyone? No. Bon, this is good. Merci beaucoup. But I have some questions about him. He is said to be the friend to the farmer. But will he be a friend to the French farmer? Or will he treat us as you Americans, you treat the Indians? Huh? Coming in, taking everything. To me, it seems better to trade with them, but to each his own, I suppose. Huh? More to the point, how will this Jefferson treat the poor French widow and her modest fortune of 3,000 piastres? For I know how it is with you poor American women. Huh? Your husbands, they do not trust you one bit. Huh? When he dies, he leaves you the use of 1/3 of the land and the use of 1/3 of the goods. He does not trust you to make contract to buy or sell or improve upon the land. It is merely yours in trust. Now me, here in Saint Louis, we keep la coutume de Paris, the custom of Paris. Under the custom of Paris, my husband should die. I receive 1/2 of the land and goods, the rest divided equally among my children. Now, just for the sake of argument, let us say, you, madame, monsieur, you are my children. Now, here, under the coutume de Paris, j'excuse, I'm so sorry, children, your father is dead. Yes? Now, 1/2 of the land and good to me, the rest divided equally among you. 1/4 land and goods to you, 1/4 land and goods to you, monsieur, 1/4 land and goods to you, 1/4 land and goods to you. And it is the same if I die, the estate is divided at that time. If Madame, she dies, the husband keeps it all. Huh? Now, les états unis. Again, I'm sorry, children, your father is dead, yes? I receive the use of 1/3 of the land and 1/3 of the goods, the movables, the tablecloths and the chickens, yes? And then the rest is divided, land, napkin, pig. I do not know how you stand for it. Huh? And you see, Saint Louis, it has been a very good place for me to live. Listen, and Rochuteau, she will tell you a little story. Once upon a time, there was the most beautiful girl you have ever seen. And she was married at the age of 15 to an innkeeper. Now, perhaps the innkeeper was cruel, huh? Perhaps he was overfond of sampling his own wares, huh? Suffice it to say, it was not a happy match. And then one day, shortly after the birth of his son, the infant lying in her arms, the innkeeper takes it into his head to go back to France. And not one word, not one sou does she receive from him in all those years. Now, if she should happen to fall in love with a handsome and very charming fur trader, and if she should happen to follow him up the river to the new settlement on the west side of the river, shortly after the birth of their 4th child, More power to her. She has established there in her independent own right. And then comes back from France the innkeeper. He goes to the governor of New Orleans and he writes a letter saying, I wish to have my wife returned to the protection of her husband. Now this is in French, I will translate for you. It means, I want my wife's 3,000 piastres in my pocket. Huh? But the governor looks at the letter. He thinks about the 2 or 3 hot, stinking, sweating, miserable months it takes to come up the river from the city. He looks out the window and who is it he sees in the summer? Not the men of St. Louis, no. It is the women who live here all the year round, who are the citizens of St. Louis. The men are all gone, trading with the Indians, going up and down the river. The governor, he looks over his head at the house that's been provided to them by her family. And what do you think? Does she go back to the innkeeper? No, she does not. And finally, he has the good grace to die, and to make her what she has been calling herself for years anyway, a veuve Chuteau, a widow Chuteau. And she receives 1/2 of his land and goods as well. And so you see, St. Louis, it has been a very good place for me to live. So tell me, you look a reasonably intelligent bunch. Do you think it is true? Will St. Louis one day be in les États-Unis? Will St. Louis be in the United States? You think so, huh? Well, you all look reasonably well fed. I suppose it may not be so bad. And you American farmers, you will need 2 things, land and grain. And bon chance, I have a great deal of both. Excuse, but my prices, they've just gone up. And as for my granddaughters, proper French marriage contracts for them. No tablecloths and pigs will do for my girls. Yes, I think I have a very, very great deal to do. Excuse, s'il vous plaît. Je dois attendre mes affaires. I must attend to my business. Au revoir. My name is Elizabeth Pickard. I'm Director of Interpretive Programs at the Missouri History Museum. And this play was actually the second play that was written when we started our new theater in the museum program back in 2008. And it's because Madame Chuteau is a featured piece of our permanent exhibit. She's come back again at the museum because, of course, she's an important part of our 250th anniversary exhibition. So I want to make sure to invite you all to come to that. It is free. It is really a remarkable exhibit. You could easily spend 4 or 5 hours, I think, in it if you wanted to see everything. And it's a very in-depth look at the diverse and really multiple perspectives on St. Louis's history. You're going to find a little bit of something. I guarantee everyone will go there and find out something they didn't know about, or something that they didn't know started in St. Louis, or just some remarkable artifact from a baby tooth, from the baby tooth collection that was done during the Cold War to try to document radioactive elements in the air because of nuclear testing, to a little purse made of a dress that Madame Chuteau owned. So really a wide variety of things. Ray asked me to talk a little bit about my background. I have a bachelor's degree in dramatic arts from St. Mary's College of Maryland. I don't know how familiar you are with the East Coast, but actually St. Mary's College of Maryland was founded as a monument school to the people on the site of the original settlement, European settlement in Maryland. And historic St. Mary's City is there. I harbored great dreams of working there, but there was a hiring freeze in the state for my whole 4 years. So I didn't get to do living history there. I did actually probably begin my costumed interpretation life at the Maryland Renaissance Festival, where I was a seer named an amphibian frog lover. I read something in a Terry Pratchett book recently that said something about very often in reenactment situations, all the girls are miserable because all they can be is wenches, because that was all that was open to women in olden times. Now, I don't know that that's a fair statement, but I think it's probably true of Renaissance festivals. So I graduated with a degree in dramatic arts from St. Mary's College of Maryland. I went to work in arts administration and acted in Washington, D.C., and then decided to make a career change and went to work at Plymouth Plantation, which is a 17th century living history museum in Plymouth, Massachusetts. I worked there for 3 years doing both costume first-person interpretation and third-person interpretation. So, of course, in a handy-dandy polo shirt aboard Mayflower 2. Yeah. And that was wonderful, too, because that let us talk about the story of Mayflower 2 and how it came across the water in 1957. We moved to St. Louis because my husband is a professor and he's at WashU, and that's a much better paying job than being a photo interpreter. And I started doing some remedial history because I knew almost nothing about St. Louis, and ended up in the graduate program at the University of Missouri St. Louis in museum studies. So it's a dual degree in history and museum studies. And by sheer accident, the Missouri History Museum had a theater company in residence called Histrionics, which went out of business. It went bankrupt. And they knew they wanted there to be a presence for theater at the museum. They brought me in as a graduate research assistant to actually look at the many different ways that museum theater is used around the country and propose a program. And so what we have are a series of plays. Some of them are multiple-person plays written and performed by our Teens Make History players. Many of them are single-person plays like this one. And there's a few reasons that I call it a play rather than first-person interpretation. There's a script. It is often framed by me coming in and saying, my name is Elizabeth, I'm going to do a play, here we go. Yes, that's Lindbergh's airplane over my head. I'm not in a living history environment, so it's very difficult for me to interpret foodways or gardening or any of those kinds of things. And then at the end, we do question and answer. So that's sort of how I got to do what is, after all, the best job in the whole world. I have to say, I'm very, very, very lucky. Does anybody have any questions, either about Madame Chouteau or my background? Yeah.
I think that we'd like to hear, as I understand it, you correct me if I'm wrong, that at Plymouth Plantation, you had to actually live.
Yes.
And did you tell that, I mean, do you know what I'm saying? I think you were there. Did you actually live that all the time?
Sure. So no, in fairness, we went home at night. So I drove to work, and got into my costume, got my baby into her costume because Phoebe, my 13-year-old, was an infant, and we played the governor's wife and daughter Mercy Bradford. And then we would take a break and go up and put things in the microwave and eat them. Or often I ate what I cooked there as well. But it is an 8-hour day of portraying someone in the 17th century for that whole day. And of course, a lot of it is the same things that you guys get.
It was that flying over.
That whistle I hear, all of those kinds of things. Which, of course, for anybody who's done it for a while, people are like, wow, you didn't write character at all. This is really the easiest part of anything that I do because I get it so much. And, of course, we were doing things like interpreting 17th century attitudes on childbirth, 17th century attitudes on religion, and all from that first-person perspective. Now, for Alice Bradford, that was not as difficult a job as my first character there. It was a woman named Tryphosa Tracy. We knew about Tryphosa Tracy when she got to Plymouth, the names of her daughters, and that her family had a cow. That was what we knew about her. Of course, that's a consistent problem in any kind of colonial history, especially when there's a high level of illiteracy, which you have in St. Louis, and especially among women. Those are sort of the things that are tough. And so there are kind of three things that I relied on to do that work well. One is story. What did I know for sure that would make a good story? She tried to come first to Plymouth on a ship called the Pickard that almost sank in open water on the Atlantic Ocean. Well, there's a harrowing tale. That's a story that I can tell. We have other people's stories about it. And I can take that story and say, what was my perspective in it? So if you are, Private Jacques Smith or whoever, and we have a general's account or something. Well, I usually think it's pretty bad practice to say, well, I heard the general say, because how many privates are really hanging out like, yeah, oh yeah, general, absolutely, you know. But you can take that account and you can say, all right, he talks about this troop movement happening. Where was I on that field? So what would that have looked like to me? What would I have seen? What would I have felt? So what are the things that we can find that are stories? Because that's also my favorite way of doing away with, hey, what's that in the sky? Is, well, do you know, I've never seen birds like they have here in North America. There are so many birds that they darken the sky sometimes. My husband's never been a hunter ever in his life, and he can go out and bring home 6 ducks in a second because there are so many birds here. So there are things that you can take from other accounts and make them that character's own. And that's the second principle, which is steal where you can. So if there's something that makes sense for your character, if there is a known perspective of someone in your walk of life, what can you steal from them? Do you agree with them or disagree with them? If you're a soldier on the way to Vincennes during the American Revolution, and you're with George Rogers Clark, and he's got you wading armpit deep through swamps in the middle of winter, how can you make that story? You know, people can imagine that. People have been in cold water. People have probably lost a shoe in the mud. How can you make that live from what's a real historic account? And that brings me to the third thing, which is always go for the human. So if you're playing a woman whose husband's been away at war for years or months, or a woman who darn well knows that her husband's got a whole other family upriver among the Indians, what's the human perspective on that? I did a play for the History Museum called Letters Home that was written for an exhibit called Between Two Worlds, Veterans Journey Home. And it was from a modern perspective of a woman who'd just come home from one of the theaters of war in the Middle East. But what we actually did to put that play together was look at soldiers writing about that experience going all the way back to the Civil War. And the thing that was unbelievable was the common threads that you could pull out across time and across conflicts and across people who won the war and people who lost the war. People talking about the camaraderie that they had with their fellow soldiers. People talking about the loneliness. People talking about the boredom. Civil War soldiers talk a lot about boredom. You know, and there's almost any soldier in any conflict will talk about the fine balance between utter boredom and terror and how they often went hand in hand. And so those are common human threads. Those are things that you can draw out that are likely to have been true, whether it's 1764 or 1964. Now, of course, the means of communication are different. But what are those human grounds that we can use to help people for just that minute feel like one little girl said to me, I got that. You know, what are those things that we can draw out? And it's not usually that my underpants are hand-sewn, right? Sometimes it is. Of course, my lack of underpants really is not great, right? But for some people it is. That's very, very important. They really want to say, okay, how did you do that? And I sew. And I want to see how you sewed this. And how did you make a knot? Did you not make a knot? Some people are interested in that. That shouldn't be our first level of interpretation ever. You know, really, to 99% of the people, the fact that the main seams on this dress are machine sewn and it's hand finished is probably fine. Yeah. You know, really, it's probably not the end of the world. Unless there's somebody who really wants to do, you know, wow, you can't really be serious about history because you used a machine. You know, or, my God, I have elastic in my stockings, and boy, am I glad. All of those little things. If you're really good on those human connections, and you're good on those stories, and you're good on helping people see themselves in the past, and that's, of course, a principle of interpretation. It's how do we make those personal connections? How do we make those people not seem like aliens who lived 500 years ago? How do we make them seem like they're right here with us today? Yes?
So, just one comment. I was in Plymouth Plantation 2 years ago, and I have to say it was one of the highlights of my trip at how utterly they stayed in character, and it was really impressive. But my question for you as Madame Chateau was, what was the most surprising thing you learned in your research?
the thing that helped me form the character, because Madame Chateau seems to have been at least not able to write. All the documents that we have with her name have an X.
Oh.
Now, she may well have been able to read, and she may have been polylinguistic. The Chateau brothers, Auguste and Pierre, claim to never learn to speak English. I don't believe that for a darn second. They probably only spoke French, but darn tootin' they understood everything that was going on around them. They were too smart businessmen to not understand what was being said. But there is one letter that we have that was written on her behalf, and she is suing her own son-in-law because he borrowed an enslaved servant of hers by the name of Baptiste to come help break up a fight, and Baptiste was killed. And she's suing him for reparations. Now, I think that tells you something about the business mind.
Yeah.
That'll go to, I don't honestly remember which son-in-law it was, but I think Pellegrini was, thank you. So she to go in and say, well, I love you, and I need $500. You know, so I think that, to me, that little document is really a window into the way that this woman thought. The other thing that I find utterly fascinating is she arrived in St. Louis in her 30s. She was in her 30s. And yet there's no more children. And I just think that's interesting. I don't know what that means. It could mean after 5 children, she was just done. It may be that there was something that happened that meant that she wasn't going to be able to have any. It could have been an illness on the Cleats' part. I don't know, but I find that fascinating. I'd love to know if that was on purpose, or if she got up the river and she said, "Thank you for bringing me here."
Yeah.
That's your
See
bring.
you around.
Yeah. I've got my land now and my cows, but we don't know. We just have no way of gauging that. He certainly, although fur trade is a very speculative business, and so you often borrowed a lot of money to get the trade goods and then hoped on a really big return. They were plagued with these stupid wars with England, because of course London was their best market. And I actually do wonder about that flour. If they're sending the flour down because they're sneaking the fur out through Canada.
That's my
Yeah.
suspicion too.
And because, yeah,
13 bales of beaver going down that one year.
yeah.
And in my reading, they were saying the British had better goods. They were having a hard time getting goods, first from France and then from Spain. So I think what they were doing was they were sending stuff down to New Orleans just to keep the Spanish off their back. And the Spanish were wanting flour. They weren't wanting furs.
Yeah.
And so the furs were going up to Canada because, my talk, these guys are from Canada.
Yeah.
Their parents were from Canada. They have relations up there, they have business connections, and I think most of the furs going upriver, not down.
And also, if they have been imperfectly cured, they didn't stink quite so much in Canada as they would in New Orleans. You can imagine. An imperfectly cured beaver hide. What that would have been like.
That's a good point.
I don't even remember where I was going with that. Any other questions? Yeah. Well, yes.
Was Madame Chateau, I done some history on Madame Chateau and did a talk on her. Was she not considered like the matriarch of St. Louis?
She
And
absolutely
everybody
was.
came to her and
Absolutely. Now, by the time that she died, in the teens, in the 18 teens, she had 52 descendants in St. Louis. And that was children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And every one of those marriages was a calculation. It was, oh, the Spanish are in control, let's get a Spanish marriage. Oh, these Americans seem like something's going on, let's get an American marriage. All right. And it was really her way of ensuring the future of that dynasty, of that family. And of course, it's really the Cleats dynasty by and large, whose belongs to Renee, her husband. The rest were Pierre's children. And so, yes, absolutely, she was considered to be shrewd,
she was a shrewd businesswoman.
very shrewd businesswoman. Yeah, and the French, that came out a little bit in the talk before as well. So those original 30, he was looking for skilled people. But if you look at the muster roll at the time of the American Revolution, you'll see the vast majority of men listed are voyageurs or bowmen. The vast majority of the men were not there for most of the year. And so if they had a business, it was the women who were conducting it. If there were deals to be made, there was something called femme sole status under the law. Technically, under both French and English law, a woman was a child. She was a minor. She couldn't make any decisions. She couldn't make a contract. She had no legal standing. Everything belonged to her husband. But there was this thing called femme sole status. And you see it in two places in the colonial world. One is among the French, where women are making contracts, they're buying and selling goods, they're making decisions. It's a big court case at the time of the American Revolution, where a deal is made with the wife and the husband comes back and doesn't like it, and so they take them to court on whether she's got the standing to make that. The other place it happened was New England and the whaling towns, because of course a whaler could be gone for 2 or 3 years, and so the wife was considered to have that sort of femme sole status. Now there was more protection, as we said earlier, for French women. She had something called a crescent and her dowry, which was the property that came. And so if my husband died in debt, they could seize everything but what was mine. In America, if my husband died in debt, they could come in and strip me naked and sell what I was wearing. The clothes I stood up in didn't belong to me. They were community property, and there was no protection for a woman under that. And that happened to Manuel Lisa's wife, actually. She was almost completely destitute because he died in debt. And that, again, going back to the plea, maybe why they never married. And they never did, even though Renee had died, because he was in a lot of debt. And yet he managed to make provisions in his will. He left some things to her children, well, to her, as a mark of the affection he had for her children, his children. And then he also set up with his former partner, Maxant, that she could buy some land for essentially $1. So it was really making sure that she was, had inherited something, even though the bulk of what he had was used to satisfy debts. Any others? I know it's almost past one. Yes.
What was Madame Chateau's, who were her parents?
So there's not a lot known, and honestly, I would have to go back and look up. The problem with that family is everyone is named Auguste Pierre or Marie somewhere. And so that family tree I have to look at every single time. She was born in New Orleans. There's some speculation that she maybe was either sort of lodged with nuns or schooled with nuns. They don't really know. She was married to a much, much, much older man, René Chateau, which was common practice in those days because he was established. Yet he was an established business owner. And so it was considered probably monetarily to be a very advantageous match. She may have had 1 or 2 children. The baptismal records are very confusing. There's 2 René Auguste Chateaus born within very close proximity to one another. So it's possible that the first was a baby who didn't survive for very long. It's possible that it was a double entry. They brought René, he got registered, Auguste, and they forgot. They brought him back. I don't know. So it's tough to tell that because more records are very confusing. But we do know he took off. René took off, and then when he came back and heard that she was living so well in St. Louis, trying to get a little payment. But
Nothing to do with that, her parents.
we know very little. I think the names are known, but I know very little looking back. Any other questions? Well, if not, I want to thank you all so much. Thank you for having me. Merci beaucoup.
Now, if you'll bear with me just a little bit, I know we all want to break our tents down, but I tell you, this School of Soldier would not have been possible without the help of a lot of people. And I don't feel bad having notes, they do that on the Academy Award. And so first I want to, again, thank our speakers. Bonnie Biggett could not be here today, she had a prior appointment. Doug Harding, Elizabeth Pickard, I mispronounced it. Anyway, I hope our speakers enjoyed Frog Talk. Also, I want to thank our Frog Talk committee, Tom Connor, Melody Connor, Jim Chesney, I don't see him here, and Richard Wessenberg could not be here today, he's settling his mother's estate. I also want to especially thank Sandra Cabot, who's the Director of Tourism here in St. Genevieve, and Bob Mueller, who lives here. Bob just does a lot of things for us here, and most important, I think he's imparted a lot of wisdom in this whole process. So I want to thank him. One of the things we did this year, actually at Sandra Cabot's suggestion, was have that Friday children's program up at the ballet school. And I think that worked out pretty well. And I want to thank the people who made that happen. Meredith Zimmer, Ken Zimmer, again, Jim Chesney, I don't see him out there. Becky McClellan, you know her, she's not here. And I don't think I see Nikki Ketting out there either today, but those are the people that made that happen. I want to thank them. And then also Donna Rausch for giving us a tour through the Armor Row House, which was really good. The other thing I want to thank, again, I think we have one officer in there, is our French colonial artillery for allowing all of the tourists to shoot the Grand City. I think they enjoyed that, and that's appreciated. And I certainly don't want to forget our auctioneers, Julie Cheeseman-Often, Tom Connor, Jim Chesney, and Russell White. And I think finally, and certainly not least, would be Shauna Cadlick for organizing the entire potluck dinner and providing a good meat course. Have a safe trip back to San
One more person that has to be.
Yes.
We thank you.
Channels 7 and 98 TV and web broadcasting are made possible through contributions and donations from viewers like you. Thank you for your support.